Okay, so strap yourselves in for this one. Today, we're going deep on a story that, honestly, it's just plain bizarre
Yeah.
and unsettling. We're talking of the Cybertruck explosion
Yeah.
and the suspect, this guy, Matt Levelsberger.
Right.
But here's the really crazy part. We get this totally mind-bending perspective from someone who actually knew Levelsberger, retired MMA fighter Tim Kennedy, who, by the way, also has Special Forces background.
Wow.
Yeah, no kidding, right? So we've got this article from MMA Junkie, where Kennedy's basically trying to wrap his head around something that just seems impossible.
Yeah, it's wild. Like, this isn't just another news story, you
Yeah.
know? It's like all these worlds colliding. You got tech innovation, this potential extremism thing, and then boom, smack in the middle of it all, these personal relationships. And it just makes you question, like, everything.
It really makes you question everything you thought you knew about people.
Totally.
Reading Kennedy's account, you just get this feeling of, wait, hold on. How is this even real? So let's start with the basics. For those who need a refresher, who is this Matt Levelsberger?
Okay, so from what we're getting from this article, Labelsberger is 28 years old,
Huh.
and he's been arrested,
Uh-huh.
charged with arson connected with that whole Cybertruck explosion.
Right.
Now, the authorities, they're digging around, looking into possible ties to some, extremist groups.
Extremist groups. Okay, so when we say extremist groups, what are we talking about exactly?
Right, yeah, good point. So we're talking about organizations, with beliefs or they're advocating actions that are way outside the mainstream.
Okay,
Think like extreme political ideologies
got it.
or groups that are just totally anti-establishment. That kind.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the specifics about Labelsberger, they're still pretty murky.
And this is where Tim Kennedy's side of the story becomes so important. I mean, the fact that he knew Levelsberger, it adds this whole other level of crazy to the situation.
It's true. You think about Kennedy, right? Military background, MMA fighter. It's not exactly the kind of guy you picture connected to something like this.
Mhm.
And that's what makes his reaction so powerful.
Right.
He's just struggling to square the Matt Levelsberger he knew, the guy he trained with the guy who's accused of doing this.
There's a quote from Kennedy in the article that really, it just stuck with me. He says, "This just doesn't compute. How can someone go from sparring in the gym to being involved in something like this?"
It's heavy, man.
It's a heavy thought. It makes you wonder, how well can we ever really know the people around us?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? Could Kennedy have been totally wrong about Levelsberger this whole time?
Mhm.
Or did something happen? Was he, like, radicalized or influenced in some way, and no one even picked up on it?
It's a chilling thought, especially when you think about how complex people are, the motivations, and then, the world we live in right now.
Yeah.
It feels so polarized.
For sure. And, you think you're a good judge of character, and then something like this happens, and you're like, wait a minute, what?
Exactly. So we have Levelsberger, the suspect. We have Kennedy trying to make sense of it all. And then, of course, you've got the Cybertruck explosion itself.
Yeah, the explosion, they're still investigating that. But you can't ignore what they targeted, right?
What do you mean?
I mean, the Cybertruck. It's futuristic, it's disruptive technology,
Uh-huh.
it represents change, it's a challenge to the status quo. So could this attack have been like a statement, a way to hit at what the Cybertruck represents?
That's kind of terrifying to think about. If something as, seemingly normal as a truck can become a symbol worthy of being attacked, what does that say about where we are as a society?
Yeah.
It feels like the lines between progress and conflict are getting all blurry.
It definitely makes you think about violence, right? And how it can be motivated by these ideological differences or even fear of change.
Right.
We can't just brush this off as some random isolated thing.
Yep.
It forces us to look at these bigger questions about how divided we are and what's really driving this extremist behavior.
And that brings us back to those big unanswered questions about Levelsberger. What made him do this? What are his connections, if any, to these extremist groups? And how did someone who trained with Tim Kennedy, someone who seemingly knew him, how did he end up mixed up in something like this?
It's like a puzzle with a bunch of pieces missing. But when you focus on the human element, like Kennedy trying to understand the possibility of these hidden motivations, it becomes clear. This story is way bigger than just an arson case. It taps into this darker side of human nature. And it's a reminder that even the people closest to us, they can surprise us in ways we never imagined.
It really does leave you with a lot to think about, doesn't it? I mean, in a world where technology is changing so fast and everyone's motives are so complex, how can we really understand the people around us? And what happens when someone we think we know is accused of something we never thought they could do?
Hmm.
Those are some tough questions to wrestle with as we close out this deep dive.
For sure.